Okay, all right. So, yep, today we're going to have a quick one. We're going to have a look at board settings. So when we were going through the Jira and Confluence administration meetups quite a while back, we went through project administration and system administration, but we never got around to going through board administration. Okay, so to access board administration, now can you see my screen at the moment?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, just thought I'd better check that. So you can see Ancient Circle Scrum Board, right?
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah, okay. No worries, I just don't have the green box around it anymore. Okay, top right-hand corner of the board, these three dots, there's an option here, Board Settings. The other options that are under here are for hiding menus, hiding the detail view, hiding the versions panel, epics panel, etc. So if I wanted to, for example, hide epic labels, on a narrow screen, it just helps to declutter the backlog here, for example, and the other ones were to hide epics and versions, so you can do that by closing those. So if we go into board settings, there is a new option on here, which is roadmaps for classic projects. So we've had a look at that one before. And then we've got these other tabs down the left-hand side. So we've got general, and we'll run through each of these in detail. We've got general, columns, swim lanes, quick filters, where we can configure our quick filters, card colors, card layout, estimation, our working days, and the issue detail view. So if we just jump back up to, and roadmap was the other one that we saw first. So if we jump into general, boards are basically a view of data, right? So a board is tied to a filter in Jira, and it just represents data from your Jira project or multiple projects if you wanted to. So the attributes in here, a board has a name. You have one or more administrators for your board. So we could add more people in here as the administrators if you want to. So Ignacio is in there, and Kudzi, make the administrators. And I think Nikhil and Jaya, you might be in different, I think Nikhil, you're in a different Jira project. Jaya's in this one. Danielle, I think you're in a different one as well. Our location of the board. So remember, we'd said previously that a board resides or is tied to a project, right? So you could have a board which pulls data from multiple projects, but it's got to live somewhere. So there's this concept of a board having a location, which is a project. We've got a filter associated with the board. And this one is filter for Ancient Circle Scrum Board. So we can have a look at that filter in a moment. But there's a copy of its JQL down here. So it's just project equals ANC, order by rank ascending. In the last meetup, when Anthony was here, we played with rank and we broke the ordering or the ability to order and shift things up and down in the backlog. So if you don't have order by rank in your Jira query or filter, then you won't be able to order items. You can move them into the sprint still, but you just can't drag them up and down. We can say who this board is available to. So if we're going to, a bit like sharing a filter, same sort of thing. So by default, it'll be shared with the project that it resides in. And then you can share it with a group or project or any logged in user, and you can add those up. So we might say, well, as well as Ancient Circle project users, we might want this one to also be available to Ancient Furniture, for example. It's interesting that it's gone back to the filter. Bit of clunky navigation there from Atlassian. Yeah, so we can see our JQL down here. Rank, yep, so we're using rank. And this will just show a summary of the projects that are involved in the board. We can pull data from multiple projects in here. So in our filter, what we might do, tell you what, I might copy this board and we'll play around with it. So if I go to, where are we? Over on the left-hand side, to copy the board, you'll have to go to view all boards. And so it's the Ancient Circle Scrum board that we're going to copy. If we go to view all boards, then you get this view. So again, to get to that, I just went to the board list on the left-hand side. I scrolled down past the boards that were in Ancient Circle to the heading of other boards, and there's the view all link there. All right. So this is the view all link. And so we can see the summary of boards in here, and you can mark boards as a favorite if you want to. So I might say that Ancient Circle, I want to have that one show as a favorite. So it'll always be in that to the top of that list when we're looking at boards. It's a Scrum board. We can see who the administrators are here. And Circle Scrum board, it's the top one, where it's located. And then we've got some options on the right-hand side here. We can edit its settings from here, which would just take us back into that the settings view. We can copy the board. We could move it to a different location, or we could delete it. You've all got administration rights, and I'd just ask that you don't delete boards, please, if that's okay. But if you want to copy one, it'll give you a pop-up here. Your copied board will use the same settings and filter as the Ancient Circle Scrum board, as you only can change these later. So yeah, okay, let's copy that one. And so here it is down here, ordered alphabetically, copy of Ancient Circle Scrum board. And for that one, I want to go into its settings. So here I'm going to change its name. So we'll call it the Not So Ancient Circle Scrum board. And administrators, I'll make Ignacio and Kutsi and Jaya.
And Paul, would you also go into the settings and click on Move? Because all you've done is you've copied it, but you haven't created haven't assigned it to a new project, right? Would you be doing that?
That's right. So it's sitting under this overarching project. So you could do that. That's right. So at the moment, it's located under the Ancient Circle project.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just it is just a mirror image with a different name of the Ancient Circle project, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So if I wanted to change this one though, so I might say, so this is our filter for Ancient Circle Scrum board, and I'm going to do a save as, I'm going to call it filter for so Ancient Circle Scrum board. We're going to type properly there. Okay, so here, remember when we were looking at filters ages ago, we could set the permissions. So this one I'm just going to say, let's go with group. Actually, I'll go to project. Ancient Circle, and anybody who's got Ancient Furniture, APC, APR. So I'm just going to add all these projects in. I'll save that. Now, so instead of being project equals ANC, I'm going to say project is in ANC. Now, what were our other projects things? So we've got ANF, Ancient Furniture, Important Bird, Mobile Transmitter. I've got some new ones in here too, Native Birds and Native Plants. That's pretty awesome. I think that was you, Jaya, wasn't it? That's awesome. Okay, so now we're pulling data from all of these different projects. That's good. So we've got a new filter here now, right? So filter for Not So Ancient Circle. And so I'm going to pick a different one, filter for, oops, Not So Ancient Scrum board. Okay, so here's the filter that we've just created, or copied really. And you can see that automatically changes the shares. So it's now shared this board also to all those projects that were involved in that filter. We can see our updated JQL down here now, project for yada yada. And it lists the projects in the board, and we can click to see the permissions for those. So if I look at those permissions, it'll bring up the permission scheme for that board, for that project, sorry. So why would we want to do that? Well, we might want to have a portfolio board. that might, for example, list initiatives or epics from multiple projects, and we might want to be able to see them. Imagine you've got a scrum of scrums or a cross-team catch-up, and you might want to be able to talk to each different project and their status. So under our swim lanes tab here, we've got base stories on, and at the moment it's selected or set to stories, and we can change that to projects, right? Let's jump back into the board and see what that looks like now. And so our active sprint view, which is what we're looking at here, our first swim lane is A&C Ancient Circle, and we can collapse that down. Then we've got our next one, A&F, and then IMB, and then we've got our native birds down the bottom there. Cool. So what else have we got in here? So we've been right through the general tab. Okay, we've looked at our filter. Now we've got a warning down here. Some issues in the save filter will not be shown on the board. View the unmapped statuses which contain these issues. So if we jump into our columns tab, we can see here that we've got 3 columns: to do, in progress, and done. And the to do, we've got open and reopened issues in here. In progress, we've got in progress. Yep, that makes sense. Then done, we've got resolved and closed under the done column. But we can see here, there are some, so we've got some that have got a status of done, 9 issues there. And we've got some with a to-do status, which have got 11 issues. If we don't map them to a column, they won't appear on our board. So we're going to put done under here, and to do, we're going to put over here. Now let's see what that looks like. We've probably got a few more issues appearing. There's a bit more data there now. And now under native birds, we can see that we've got more items appearing here. Now, does anybody know why the native birds project by default had a to-do status and a done status, whereas the other projects, which were from the mock data, didn't? Quick test for everybody.
It was a copy-paste job?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. So when you create a new project in Jira, the workflow and the statuses you get with it are different to the ones that with the mock data. So remember when we were talking about the mock data that I'd brought in, I talked about the workflow and how it had a closed status and it was using the Jira workflow. And if we view that as a diagram, it was sort of the more older style where there was a closed status and a resolved status. And there was always a lot of confusion about, well, if you've resolved something, isn't that closed? And why have you got a separate status for it? So now the default workflow is just to do, in progress, and done. And it uses, Jira uses a resolution. So a resolution is like an outcome to indicate, okay, you've moved it to done, but what was the outcome for it? Did you do the work? Did you decide not to do it? Was it a duplicate of something else that was already in your backlog, right? So the resolution itself, that value, is used to capture the outcome when you move something to done. And so that's why we've now got a blend of 2 different workflows. We've got this one, which is from ancient furniture and ancient circle and all that sort of stuff, resolve, closed, etc. And if we jump across to the native plants one, and native birds, wasn't it? We jump across into native birds and look at its project settings, and we go to its workflow. And I've just jumped into the project, kind of project settings and down to workflows. We've got a, remember that simplified workflow for projects? And for this one, we could actually change the columns and the statuses in here. So have a look at its diagram. Then we've got to do, done, in progress, and you can go from any status to any status. When you create one, it'll automatically go to do, then you can jump freely from one to the other. So it's quite a different and less rigorous workflow than what we had with the other imported data ones. So that's that reason. So if I jump back into our board settings here, so this is looking back at the not so ancient Scrum circle here. If I wanted to add a column, so I might call this waiting. Let's call it prioritized. And I might move that across to the left. So we might have, actually I'm going to call it open. I'm going to shift it left one more. And so open and reopened, I might map to that. And then we've got open, to do, in progress, and done. Don't worry that it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You might have cause to have something that's open, and then to do you might use that when it's in a sprint or something like that. So now if we go back to our board, now we've got open, to do, in progress, and done. So, okay, A and C, you can see I can't drag that into to do because its workflow only covers in progress, resolve, close, and you can see how it's moving to green or changing to green. When I move over in progress, the background changes to green there, which means I can drop it there. If I hold it over to do and let it go, it'll just go back. I'll say something isn't letting us move A and C to do, and that's because of the workflow that's sitting beneath it.
Just a
so
question.
there are some, yeah, sure.
Sorry. So isn't it then easier? Isn't it then easier to just create a new board rather than copy in case the workflows underneath that just end up blocking everything, and maybe you end up spending double the effort than you ordinarily?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Remember that a board is a filter to the data behind it. So the constraint with the workflow here is not in the board, it's in the project behind it. So Ancient Circle, because it's got one workflow and the other one for the native birds has a different workflow, it's the clashing of the workflows behind that is causing the issue here rather than the board itself. So if I created a new board from scratch, I would end up with the same issue with the mismatched workflows. So copying a board gives you a leg up with the configuration and just being able to tweak what's there rather than starting something from scratch. The solution would be to change the workflow that is behind that or applied to that project. So maybe let's see what that would look like if we change the workflow, right? So for Ancient Circle, this is going to mess up our data, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. So if I don't want to edit that workflow, I want to add another workflow. So if I look at native birds, and so we've got this one, software simplified workflow for project NAB. And under our Ancient Circle, I'm going to add an existing workflow. And you might be wondering, why would we add a workflow? Why wouldn't we just swap it out? And the answer to that is that you can associate different issue types with a different workflow. So this is going to get really complicated and might lead to inconsistent behavior in your board, right? So your users, if you had a task, for example, that you can move to do, but you couldn't move a bug to do, then people are going to be even more confused. So it takes some thought, and it would be best to have a consistent workflow.
So the moral of the story here is planning, and more planning.
Or reflect and adapt, yeah.
Right, or reflect and adapt,
yeah. So, and as you're trying things out, because you will end up having users say, oh, could you just change this, for risks? Could you give me a different workflow for risks as opposed to stories and tasks? And that would make sense, right? And in that case, okay, let's go down that path. In that case, you might end up with one board for risks or RAID management. So risk assumptions and dependencies may have their own workflow. And your stories and tasks and things might just have a standard sort of a workflow. So separating out issues by boards could be one way to address that. And you would do that by your filters. Right, so remember I know this is getting quite complex here now, but remember this filter that we had, we can amend that. So we could have one filter for stories and tasks and another one for risks as well, where one would say, don't include risks, issues, assumptions, dependencies, for example. And the other one, our RAID board filter, might say only include those issue types.
And that's quite separate to workflows, which again are individual. As you pointed out, you can have a different workflow, a unique workflow for risks which require certain steps and certain actions, separate to a workflow for the other types of issues, right? Which is user stories, tasks, etc.
Yeah,
and again,
right.
and again, independent of the way it's being filtered out on the boards.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe let's just quickly create a workflow for risks. Maybe let's go that way. So I'm going to go into, under my settings, go into issues, and I'll go to workflows. And I'm going to copy, a workflow. And we're going to call this our RAID workflow. Workflow used for, risks, assumptions, etc. Some people would say, well, assumptions are just another type of risk. We're not going to get into that conversation. All right, so here is our workflow that we've just copied. Now, for this one here, you might say, well, Paul, why have you bothered with this? Well, it's because I think some of these, if I go to closing, it will have already done some things like setting the resolution for me. This one hasn't. So what I might do here, I'm going to get rid of this update values transition. That was the one that we created ages ago. Delete that. And we have this transition called resolved issue or resolve issues. And that one is going to fire an issue resolved event. Right. So I'm going to get rid of my resolved status. And so now we can go from open in progress. What are some of the statuses that we might have for risks, issues, assumptions, etc.?
For risks, you could have a status of
Triage? Oh, you're muted, Ignacio.
oh,
oh.
Sorry, I was holding onto the space bar. I was going to say mitigated or reviewed or reassess, because you want to assess the residual review once you've taken a mitigation action.
Mitigated new status, okay.
You could have one of transferred to a third party, for example. So the status is transferred. You could have one, and a final one is accepted, which, okay, we're accepting the risk and we're now waiting, pondering to see whether the issue is going to be, trigger an issue.
Now, let me ask you a question about these three. Are these outcomes or are they statuses? So for something that was transferred, mitigated, and accepted, is that its final landing place, or is that sort of a holding place where you would later close the risk?
Okay, good point. It's probably more landing, an outcome. Yeah. So in which case, risks status is either new, open, closed, I would say.
If we had, we maybe have new instead of open.
Oh, right. Yeah. New. Yep. Under triage or assessment.
Yep. Okay. So I'm just going to. Oops. So just put that one across there, and down there. And I'm going to get rid of the open status. And then we've got triaged.
Yep.
I think it's not triaged, triaged. All thumbs today. Triaged. Okay. And what was the other one?
Closed.
Closed. Yep.
Or resolved. One or the other.
Yeah. Well, let's use closed for now.
Yeah.
If that's right. I'm going to get rid of this reopened status because I think that's just confusing as well. Okay, so we would go from new to triaged, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe let's just reuse that one. And then we would go from triage to closed, right?
Yep.
And we might want to go from closed back to new. And we're going to call this one reopen. Oops. Okay. So these three, let's just quickly jump into resolutions for a second. So transferred, mitigated, and accepted. Let's just add them in as new resolution. So I've got transferred.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mitigated. And accepted. Okay, so we've got those new ones in there. So we'll delete them out, delete these statuses here. Okay. So we go from created, new, triage, and we're going to get rid of in progress as well. And triage, I'm going to change that. Instead of being a to-do category, I'm going to call that in progress because we're still working on it, right? And then close. Now, when we close it, we're probably going to want to see a screen. And let's see, we might have a resolve issue screen. And we'll say, right, what's on that screen? So if we have a look at our screens and resolve issue screen. And our resolve issue screen, we can pick a resolution, we can pick fixed versions if you want to, assignees, etc. And your question is probably going to be about that. Well, that's great, but I don't want to see all these other resolutions for a risk because they don't apply, like won't do. Well, that doesn't apply to a risk, right? And so with Jira, we can say, now I'm just going to do a quick Google here because I can't remember how to do it. So Jira limit resolutions. Jira.resolution.include. Okay. So we want to have a property, I think it is, on our transition. And we probably want to have there we go, field.resolution.include. So there's one I've used earlier. And I think it's going to be, it's going to be the ID of the resolution. Now, how do we get the ID of a resolution? Well, for these three that we've just created, if we hover over the edit button, you can see down on the bottom area of the screen, so just down in this area when I hover over it.
Yeah.
Right, we can see an ID, and they'll be sequential. So we've got 10008, next one is 10009, and the last one's 10010. So 10008, so I'd put in here.
There it is, 10008.
So I've done this before, obviously. So if I add those, and that would have been with different resolutions, but it's just thankfully remembered the IDs. So now that we've got that limit on that transition, sorry, I'm confusing myself now, then that should reduce the number of resolutions that we've got left. So we've got 4 minutes left. Maybe let's see if we can try this out, right? So we've got our RAID workflow. We've got a basic workflow here, and we've got a closed transition, which or I need it to resolve the issue. So I want it to set the resolution. Actually, I'm going to change that. Instead of being issue closed, I'm going to fire an issue resolved, and that will set the resolution date for me. And then on, if we go out of closed, I probably want to wipe out that resolution date. So instead of being a generic event, I'm going to fire an issue reopened, and I want to clear my field value, which is going to be my resolution. And I'll also want to clear my resolved date. Resolved. Okay. So we've got our workflow, RAID workflow. Okay, so for Ancient Circle, I want to add an existing workflow. Here's my RAID workflow. All right, I've just got these. Next, which issue types do I want to associate with it?
Right.
So I've got assumptions, issues, risks, issues, assumptions, and dependencies. If I go finish, and I publish, now it's going to ask me, okay, so for these things, and luckily we've got none, right? We've got zero, no risks, no issues, no assumptions and dependencies. But when you change from one workflow to another, Jira's going to say, well, hey, hang on a second. We've got some statuses in the old one that we don't have in the new one. What do you want to do with them? And so you would have the option from the old workflow to the new workflow to map. So we can say, well, risks, for those that are open, I want them to go to new. For those that are in progress, I want them to go to triage. So if you change workflows, then there's a bit of work to do as you migrate things across. But Jira it'll prompt you and take care of all of that for you. We're lucky here that we've got none, right? So now to finish this off, I need to associate. And so this will be associating the issues with their new workflows. So for risk, issues, assumptions, and dependencies, there were none, but there are 103 other ones that it just needed to check the workflow for them. Okay, so we've now got Jira workflow, the standard one, associated with these, and our RAID workflow is associated with these. We haven't got time to update the boards and all of that. The next step, logical step, would be to keep the original workflow for all of these issue types and exclude out of our filter risks, issues, assumptions, and dependencies, and then to create a new board for just risks, issues, assumptions, and dependencies, right? Maybe we want to try this out though, really quickly. So under Ancient Circle, we're going to create a risk. First risk. Might worry about Nevic link and all that sort of stuff yet. Assign it to me. And so here's the first one that we've created. So our status is new. So now we can go to triage. No screen appears because we didn't specify a screen, right? And if we go to closed, drum roll and fingers crossed, hopefully this will work. Okay, cool. So now we've only got those three resolutions to choose from. So in this case, we're going to say, well, that's been mitigated. There's an option to put a comment in and you can close it. And there's our outcome there, our resolution.
So Paul, in summary, is it fair to say that the relationship between filters, workflows, and resolutions is many to many to many, and you can just adjust and pick and choose? Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And this is where, remember in the very early days, I said Jira can be really, really simple. So out of the box, you create a project and you get that basic workflow and that sort of stuff. But it can do pretty much everything except make your breakfast. So it gets, because of that many to many to many, it can get very complicated. So it can do a lot of different things. I think I might have said to you before too, there was one client that I was doing some consulting for last year, and they had a workflow that had about 24 steps in it. And they wanted to, and this was to manage their clients who were purchasing software off them. They wanted to know dropout points along that workflow and the reasons for the dropouts. And so it could have been that people might have got a quote and then gone, no, too big, we're not going to go ahead because it's more than we expected. Or it could be, sorry, we've got to go back for funding, or no, we've decided not to go ahead. So there are 3 different resolutions at that particular dropout point. And there would be others along the way. And then they wanted to be able to create a dashboard and say, well, we want to know if it dropped out at contract stage, what were the resolutions in a 2D grid perhaps, and then the other areas that they could drop out, and then you end up with a 2-dimensional grid of statuses by resolution and outcome.
Wow.
Yeah, so it can be pretty powerful and can do a lot for you. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. If I can do this, anybody can, right? So it's just from me playing around with stuff and breaking things, trying things out. And that's exactly why I've set up these Jira instances, so you guys can go and try things out and break it. And, if you happen to destroy anything, we can bounce back. It's okay. But just rip into it.
Good stuff.
All right.
Thanks. Thank you, Paul.
No worries.
Thank
You're
you
very
so
welcome.
much, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kuzi. Thanks.